So welcome back, everybody. If I could ask everyone in the room to take your seats again, and we're going to be getting started for the next session of this year's conference. So the next session we're going to be focusing on looking a bit beyond 5G, so looking at the path towards 6G and spectrum and connectivity requirements for that. So we're delighted to have Christian here with us in person, and the other panelists and our moderator will all be joining virtually. So I'd like to, if possible, welcome now Bibi Bharat Bhatia. Bibi, welcome. Good to see you and good to have you with us. As I said, we do have Christian here in the room, and the rest of the participants will be joining us virtually. So really looking forward to this discussion, though. So without further ado, I will pass over to you, and look forward to hearing what you and everyone has to say. Over to you.
Thank you, Dan, and hope everything is well in Bangkok. Sorry, I couldn't make it physically, but I'm right here online. And today we are going to have an exciting panel today on way beyond 5G. Since yesterday, we have been listening to and debating various spectrum bands, low band, mid band, high band, millimeter wave bands, and how the 5G has progressed and how various bands are shaping up. In this session, we are going to look at how the world is looking at moving to 6G or moving beyond 5G, and how the spectrum landscape will roll out in all the bands, low, mid, high, and then maybe super high or terahertz, or those kind of bands, or sub-terahertz bands. We have a large panel, excellent panel, and I would like to start first with Miss Christina Data. She is the director of the Spectrum Policy and Analysis at Ofcom UK, and she leads the Mobile Data Strategy Program with Ofcom UK. So over to you, Christina, for your presentation.
Thank you very much, Bhatia, and good afternoon, good morning, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here with you in this second day of the conference. As Bhatia said, I'm Christina Data from Ofcom. Ofcom is the communication regulator in the UK and is responsible to manage the spectrum, this critical and very scarce resource. And we're here actually to sort of make sure that everyone can access the spectrum they need. If I can have my slide on, excellent, there they are. So what I'm here to talk about is really how the spectrum landscape will need to change, how things will need to change in the future to enable this transition from 5G to 6G, as I said, because we want to enable both innovation across different sectors, but also the existing sector to grow and innovate as well. Next slide, please. So it doesn't need much of an introduction, these slides. Obviously, we have seen an evolution of mobile technology from analog to digital to 5G now in the 2020s. Everyone around the world is currently deploying 5G and seeing the benefit of the faster speed of 5G. But obviously, as every decade there is a new technology, mobile technology coming about, the world is focusing on 6G. The ITU is developing the IMT 2030 vision for 6G, and we may see a few things coming or actually becoming stronger in their positioning as 6G is developed. I'm only going to mention a few. Obviously, the potential for new use cases. We have been discussing the holographic communication, but also more immersive experiences. Sustainability from the start as key, particularly in the developing context. Integration with other networks. So again, I will be talking a little bit about network convergence here. And another area that is being seen as critical is this joint communication and sensing coming to life in 6G, together with an higher security and higher resilience from the start. Next slides, please. As the mobile technologies have evolved, obviously the traffic has increased because we've seen a lot of new applications in that journey going from analog to digital and now to 5G. And in the UK, we've seen an average 40% year-on-year growth, particularly in the last few years, as more and more users benefit from mobile applications. And this is just going to continue in a way. And we've recently published a document, Meeting Future Demand for Mobile Data, where we've actually outlined three different scenarios of potential growth, all of which may need network to respond in a slightly different way. Next slide, please. In a slightly different way, because not only mobile networks are evolving, but we're also seeing a changing business model, new players, new users of spectrum, all coming into the market. So what we have outlined in our document recently published is the need of potentially denser network, including more small cells, to actually meet the very hotspot centric demand that may continue to grow, but at the same time also a wider set of connectivity and improved connectivity across the UK in our case. I've mentioned an increasing range of players, so we want to, again, as a spectrum regulator, enable anyone who is out there who want to provide the connectivity solution to be able to provide connectivity solution, both for consumers, but also in the context of private mobile network for industry player. And to enable that, we have already sort of allowed for a lot more spectrum sharing. So we've opened up access to mobile bands where they are not being used by mobile operators themselves, so that new provider can offer connectivity in area that may not as yet be the target of MNOs, but also we've opened up bands that enable specific industrial deployment for manufacturing, ports, and various other use cases, all on a shared basis. Obviously, as I mentioned at the beginning, we're seeing an integration of network with as technology evolves, and a greater role for cloud and edge computing. What we're doing as a regulator, we are sort of monitoring what is going on internationally and nationally at the spectrum level. And we know, and I think some of my fellow panelists today will touch on this, but the vendor community is looking at more and additional spectrum for 6G, for this evolution. Let's call it the evolution from 5G to 6G in the 7 to 20, 7 to 24 gigahertz band. We're also seeing a lot of interest in what is terahertz, let's call it sub-terahertz, so in the 90 to 300 gigahertz sort of range. That will be the new frontier. We looked at millimeter wave, and millimeter wave has become a reality in 5G. In the context of 6G, we're going beyond, and terahertz will be the new pioneer in a way in enabling 6G, where potentially you will have a lot of contiguous spectrum for very, very specific type of application, but we also will see a lot more local and shared access. All of this in a context of, yes, wireless broadband is growing, but we need to make sure that we meet the need of all existing spectrum user and other spectrum user as well. So our job as a regulator, as a resource manager for spectrum, is becoming more and more complex in a way to make sure we take into account and we enable a variety of service out there that benefit people and businesses. And we also acknowledge the fact that, yes, mobile will require different spectrum bands, but again, we need to consider everything in the whole. Next slide, please. I've sort of started already on this slide. Our job is becoming more and more important to understand what is going on as demand shift and network evolves. So we've just published at the end of March our spectrum roadmap. Our spectrum roadmap, which is coming from the strategy that we published last year. And when we identified our sort of strategic objective, the vision that we had for the communication market, we decided to publish a roadmap focusing on a little bit more on the what. What is it that we will do to actually enable the vision that we have set in the strategy? And clearly there is a greater role for us to look at the impact of technology development on network convergence. So different networks are sort of converging in a way to deliver different type or similar type of services. So we want to understand the implication that this technology evolution may have on spectrum. We want to accelerate innovation, particularly in the sharing environment, and we're promoting the use of spectrum sandboxes. So being able to test in a potentially geographically limited location something slightly different to see whether we could enable more from a spectrum management perspective, from a licensing and authorization perspective. And obviously, we totally understand the importance of better data for better spectrum management. So we will want to explore how we could either obtain more data from stakeholders through our powers, but also use more of the data that we get in terms of measurement that we do to actually enable a more efficient use of the spectrum. Because in the end, all of the work that we're trying to do is to be able to squeeze more out of this scarce resource and make sure that everyone can use the spectrum. Next slide, please. So in a way, and I'm concluding with this slide, our work is really sort to try and in preparing for this next evolution of mobile network to make sure that we understand the needs of this evolution, but also we take into account of all of the other spectrum user. And if I can leave the audience with something that is very important from a regulator perspective, is to try and see a lot more collaboration in how the spectrum is being used, understanding of how our data, additional data could help in actually enabling more in preparation for future use cases and future growth, rather than compete at the technology level or at the spectrum level. So this is all from me, a short whirlwind of our thinking in preparing for the next evolution of mobile technology. As I said, I would highly recommend, if anyone is interested, to have a look at our spectrum roadmap and the mobile spectrum demand paper that we've recently published. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Christina. That was really very well done. Actually, you presented the whole picture, right from the new use cases, immersive experiences, non-terrestrial networks, and then coming up to the two frequency ranges, 7 to 20 gigahertz, and then sub-terahertz or 90 to 300 gigahertz. And I think spectrum sandbox is really the perhaps a new thinking. And thanks for bringing that.
Thank you.
And thank you very much. I'm not going to move on to the next speaker, which is Dr. Guangyi Liu. He is from the China Mobile Corporation. He heads the 6G China Mobile and 6G Alliance in China and a number of other committees. So over to you, Dr. Guangyi.
Thank you. I'm Guangyi from China. I think it's my year this searching for
Dr. Liu, I think your voice is cutting up. Can you just redo your network? Not able to hear correctly. I'm not sure if everybody else is able to hear you.
But from my side, it's okay. So I don't know.
Yeah, it's okay now. Go ahead.
Okay. Thank you, BB. I think I'm going to from China Mobile, and now I think it's my pleasure to join this very exciting session, especially we discuss spectrum for the next 10 years. And so today, my slides will cover the vision requirements and the spectrum towards the year 2030. Next page, please. Next, based on our work on the vision requirements, we do see towards the year 2030, the key feature of the world will be the digital twin and the ubiquitous intelligence. That means beyond year 2030, we will not just have a physical world, but also we'll have a digital world. So based on the digital world, we can predict the future of the physical world and even figure out the intervention solutions to solve some problem in potential problems and try to change the future of the physical world. And also, based on the digital world, we will have big data enough. Anywhere, anytime, and also it can support us to support the ubiquitous intelligence anywhere, any place. That means the AI application will be anywhere, any place. Next page. So based on the slide, the vision, we have identified many interesting use cases and new usage scenarios for the society. For example, the first one, the holographic interaction, which demand very high data rate. For example, near to 1 terabits per second. And also, second one interesting scenario is the sensory interconnection. That means we will not just digitize and communicate and exchange our vision, our voice, but also we can even digitize our touch, even our smell, taste, and even our emotion in mind. And then it will give us really immersive communication among different among the human, and also even between the human and the robots and so on. The third one is, of course, is a human digital twin. That means based on the embedded sensors and also the wearable sensors, we can collect enough data from our body, our organs, then we can try to predict the potential disease and give us some hints and try to prevent in advance for such disease to try to avoid it's happening to our body. Then I do believe with this capability, of course, it will help us to improve our quality of our life. The fourth one, of course, is very popular recently. It's an immersive internet. Somebody also call it as the metaverse. But anyway, I think it's based on the 5G XR's progress. I do believe we can do more in the next 10 years. So it will be a very positive way for us to pursue better user experience for our daily life and work and entertainment. And so on. So there's so many. I don't like to go through one by one. Please, next page, please. So based on this user experience, we have derived the potential key performance indicator and its requirements. From this picture, you can see we will demand if we want to support the new services, new applications we have identified. We do need to improve the network's capability, like the user experience, data rate, like the peak data rate, like the speaker efficiency, aerial traffic, and so on. So based on this, you can see for 6G, definitely we need more spectrum. We need even larger contiguous bandwidth for the even higher data rates like the terabits per second. So next page, please. So from the spectrum, we have to address how we can achieve the peak data rates, like the terabits per second. We have to provide the user experienced data rate more than 1 gigabits, and also we need to improve the traffic volume density, especially over 5G several times, and also the spectrum efficiency. We also need to consider how to improve. Then we can totally, with the new spectrum, we can fully fulfill the requirements, the demands from the new usage scenarios and beyond the year 2030. So from the spectrum perspective, we do see, in one hand, we need the larger bandwidth, especially the contiguous bandwidth, to support very, very high data rates, 10 or even 100 times of current 5G can achieve. And also we need, so for the larger contiguous bandwidth, of course, the people just see now we can go to spectrum above 6 gigahertz, sub 10 gigahertz, or even minimum wave, and also terahertz, even the visible light. And also we need to consider the both licensed spectrum and unlicensed spectrum. Try to think how we can make full use of all these spectrum to support us for future. And also, another aspect is the more efficient use of the multi-bands owned by the each operators. As you know, for each operator, traditionally we have 2G, 3G, 5G, 4G. Later we will have 6G. So for different bands, we will have different. For different systems, they have occupied different bands. For future, how we can just make full use of these bands to serve our customer in the best way, we need the coordination among multi-bands, even multi-system. I think that's also a very key issue for 6G to fully consider it. The third one aspect is the high spectrum efficiency. And always when we ask more spectrum from the regulator always tell us you need to make full use of your spectrum. So one thing important is to try to use the new technology to improve the spectrum efficiency as much as possible is also one of the objectives for 6G. So we need to fully consider the new technologies to really achieve this. So next page, please. So for the multi-band correlation, of course, according to the experience of 2G, 3G, 5G practice, we do believe the coverage, especially the seamless coverage for one operator is very, very important. So for the early deployment of 6G, we do believe the sub 10 gigahertz band will be very, very important, especially good ways to have, for each operator, we could have 500 megahertz per carrier. Then we can just improve the basic user network capability, especially compared to 5G. Then we can improve 10 times level. And also the other bands like the millimeter wave, terahertz, visible light, and so on, they can be deployed in a cost-efficient way and energy-efficient way. That means we can deploy it in an on-demand way. When it is necessary, we deploy it. When it is not necessary, we can just switch it off. I think that's the basic ideas for future multi-bands application and usage from an operator perspective. I think that's all my views I like to share. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Liu. I think very nicely covered the whole bandwidth, right from how the ubiquitous intelligence and ubiquitous sensing is going to play a major role in terms of interaction between the digital world and in terms of the physical world, and data rates up to 1 terabyte really will call for new spectrum, and you're going right up to X-rays. That's something
Thank you.
totally new. Yes, and hopefully we'll have further discussion on that during Q&A session. And thank you very much for that. I'm going to move on to the next speaker, Mr. Stuart Cook. He is the chair of the Global Spectrum team at the Global Suppliers Association, Global Mobile Suppliers Association, and also the director Samsung. So over to you, Stuart, for your presentation.
Thank you, BB. It really is great to be here on behalf of the GSA to present some of our initial thinking on spectrum for 6G. Next slide, please. You know, when I look back at the the original ITU, IMT vision, you know, that vision of being able to connect everyone globally, I think, perhaps you think, we've done pretty well as an industry in cooperation with the regulators and the research community. You know, from the very early days in the 1980s with simple analog voice through to 5G, now not just enhanced mobile broadband for users, but also beginning now to address things and devices. And so I think the time is right now to begin to plan for the ongoing success of that ITU and the IMT vision. And as we look forward to 6G, now is the right time to think about the vision and the standards and the spectrum requirements and the timelines. And 6G, you know, it's not just about extreme connectivity and for humans, but it's also about things and devices. It's about that immersive, augmented experience, the virtual world augmented with the real world. And so, next slide, please. You know, you've seen slides like this many times, and Christina showed one for the UK, but this one is taken from the Ericsson Mobility Report, and it just shows the huge growth in data traffic over the last few years and extrapolates forward. And you can see that 5G becomes a predominant technology in the latter half of this decade. Next slide, please. In terms of that vision then and that research activities, here are some examples of some of the research activities that are going on around the world. There are others, of course, all under that umbrella of the ITU, IMT vision. Next slide, please. It takes a long time between developing the vision, the standards, and commercialization. And with 6G, we're targeting commercialization around the year 2030 and onwards. You can see with 3G, it took around 15 years. With 5G, it took around 8 years. And we would anticipate that 6G, starting with the vision and the ITU and then the standards, the detailed standards in organizations such as 3GPP, with commercialization, we expect that to take around 10 years. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. And so the detailed timeline is being discussed in the ITU, and there's pretty good consensus now in terms of the timeline. Some fine-tuning on some of the details still to be discussed, but this shows the detailed timeline within the ITU, the Working Party 5D, as we head towards IMT 2030. And we're in that vision and technology trends phase at the beginning. And you can see ITU, 3GPP, and other standards bodies interacting over the course of the next 10 years towards commercialization around 2030 and onwards. Next slide, please. And so what about the spectrum there? Previous presentations have talked about spectrum as well. I think it's really important that we maximize the use of the existing spectrum that the industry already has. So the 4G spectrum, the 5G spectrum, certain particular bands within those ranges, we need to enhance the technology, evolve it, and maximize its use. But that's the use of the existing spectrum. And we would suggest as an industry association that now is the time the right time to begin a conversation around new spectrum for 6G to support the ongoing growth and success of IMT. And so we would suggest 2 ranges that we begin to think about in that conversation: 7 to 24 gigahertz, 92 to 300 gigahertz, the so-called sub-terahertz. So let's begin to think about those 2 spectrum ranges in addition to the reuse of the existing spectrum. We know that the spectrum is heavily used and continues to be even greater used. And as Christina said, perhaps we should think even more about sharing. Are there any portions of these ranges that are lightly used? Is there an opportunity to share on a geographic or a time or even an altitude basis, etc.? So that's the conversation that we need to think about. Next slide, please. And so in summary, let's exploit what we have already in terms of those low, the mid and the high bands. Let's think about the outcome of the WRC 23 and some of the agenda items there. 6G research is well underway, targeting commercialization around 2030 and onwards. I think it's really important to stress that coverage as well as capacity will remain really important. And so additional spectrum from all of the ranges is important. We would propose to begin to think about new spectrum from within 7 to 24 and the sub-terahertz range. Sub-terahertz is a new frontier as we expand the boundaries of what is possible. Early stages in terms of the WRC 27, but we would suggest let's have a conversation about a potential agenda item for the WRC 27. And let's continue to support the ITU's IMT vision as we head towards 6G and of course the 3GPP global standard. Thank you very much, BB.
Thanks, Stuart. I think you have very well summarized the whole issue of spectrum for 6G or beyond 5G. And I think as in the ITU Working Party 5D, we start working on the vision and the technology trends and then move on to the spectrum. I think these are the issues that will be debated at length. And you're right about talking about agenda item 10 of WRC 23 to look at an IMT agenda for. We have had every conference with an IMT agenda, so we can't miss 27 as well. So thank you very much for that. And I think you also very rightly brought out the issue of 7 to 24 gigahertz and 90 to 300 gigahertz that Christina also mentioned. So I think we will have some more debate on that. Thank you very much. And now moving straight ahead to our next speaker, Dr. Lee Hyuk-woo. He's the professor of Dankook University of Korea and also the TTA's 5G committee chair. So over to you, Dr. Lee, for your presentation.
Thank you, BB, for kind introduction. My name is Lee Hyun-woo, currently serving as a mobile communication standard body of the Korean standard body called TTA, and also serving as vice chairman of the 5G Forum for International Collaborations. So I'm very happy to join this valuable conference, even though this is my first time for this conference, but I found that there are many good sessions to follow. So I will be continue to join if possible. So I prepared a few slides from Korean 6G vision and some implication on spectrum for 6G. Okay, next page, please. Actually, previous one, please. Previous page, please. Next one. Yeah, okay. Actually, several persons already mentioned the characteristics of 6G, but for my understanding, the 4G provide the service to each person, while the 5G provides service to the industry, because in 5G there are many vertical industries to incorporate mobile technology. For example, transportations, manufacturing, and energy, and health, etc. However, at 6G area, I think the mobile technology will penetrate into all of the societies, including home, village, community, and city level. I think that is the key word for 6G. Okay, next one, please. Yeah, based on this analysis, in Korea, we had established phase 1 of 6G plan last year. So it will have 5 years. And maybe we will prepare the second phase 2 from year 2026 as well. At the phase 1, 5 years, we start from the core technology requirement and concept design for year 1 and year 2. And in year 4 and year 5, we will test the concept, establish some test bed, and we'll prepare for standard in GPP or ITU. So based on this schedule, we selected 6 hyper requirements representing 6G. So the one is the high performance in terms of data rate or bandwidth. And second is hyper broadband that specify the spectrum extension up to 300 gigahertz. And third one is hyper precision in terms of time domain. So roughly 10% of the, less than 10% of the latency of the 5G should be implemented in 6G. And the first one is the hyperspace. That means that is the extension, the dimension, current 2D dimensions to 3D dimensions, up to few tens of kilometers, or up to even few hundreds of kilometers, to include the low Earth orbit system into 560. And hyperintelligence is the including the AI ML concept in implementing the wireless or even core network design. The last one is hypertrust, because in 6G, all technology penetrate into the every part of the society. So the importance of the security or trust is getting more and more. Okay, next one, please. Yes, we summarize the 6 hyper concept in 2 pages. And the first one is the hyper performance and hyper broadband. But the both requirement need the wide spectrum to implement up to 1 terabit per second speed network. And from user experience data rate point of view, maybe few gigabit per second. So that is maybe to support this one, very wide spectrum in sub-terrestrial band will be required. In second, the third one is hyperspace requirement. So it is basically the extension current 2-dimensional coverage to 3-dimensional coverage. At this moment, we have 3 tiers. The first tier will be up to few hundred meters to support a UAM type mode. The second tier will be up to few tens of kilometers to support the airplane into communication coverage. And third tier will be there few hundred kilometer to incorporate the low Earth orbit system into communication system. Okay, next one, please. Yeah. The hyper precision means in the precision in terms of time domain. So to reduce the latency as well as the latency variance into minimum level. This is very important to provide the industry applications, and the including the concept of AI ML is required in either in wireless, for example, terminal node B, or in the core network as well. And last, the hypertrust field, because at this moment we have very secure network inside the mobile network, but in 6G area, we need to provide the end-to-end. That means the terminal to server or service level security should be maintained. So in order for that, we need to have more studied on this security or trust field. Okay, last one, please. So considering this requirement, I think that in terms of spectrum issues, at least we need to extend the up to sub terahertz, but maybe 100 to 300 gigahertz can be a candidate at this moment. And second thing is that the mid-band extension, already a previous speaker said that the importance of 7 to 24 gigahertz band. Basically, I fully agree with that, because currently in 3P, FR1 and FR2 are main, but between FR1 and 2 and beyond FR2, we need to have some work. And third thing is that the low band reprogramming. At this moment, the 5G focus on the using mid band up to 3 gigahertz band. I know that only in China they started 5G in the 700 gigahertz band, but I think in other regions also will use low band for 5G and beyond 5G. However, the problem is that in that low band, the spectrum is fragmented in the very low bandwidth system. So we need to reform the low band to provide more wide band services. The last one is the raising spectrum usage efficiency. Currently, we have only licensed and unlicensed approach, but we need to have some kind of third or fourth type of spectrum policy to raise the spectrum usage efficiency. Okay, this is the end of my presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Lee. Very well covered. I think the point that you made about 6G to be a core infrastructure, I think that's a very, very valid point. And I think as we go forward towards 2030, there seems to be a consensus among all the speakers that speeds of the kind of 1 terabit per second would be needed in the 6G level. And this whole 6 hyper concept that's Korea's thinking, and that's really also very good, particularly hyper trust and hyper precision. Those will be very important for the industrial usage. Security is very critical. So thank you very much for your presentation, and we'll be coming to Q&A soon. But we still have one last speaker. I would like to invite Dr. Christian Gomez. He is the Senior Director of Government and Regulatory Affairs at Viasat. And I think Christian would cover the satellite part of the whole 6G debate. So, and he is physically present in Bangkok. So over to you, Christian.
Thank you. Just wait for my slides to come on. Good afternoon, everyone. Okay, thank you very much. So now we're going to think about 6G and what's next in terms of the future of spectrum towards 2030. So it's a bit of a crystal ball exercise. Nevertheless, we can always grab some vectors to have a better crystal ball exercise. So I propose we approach the discussion about 6G from a realistic viewpoint instead of wishful thinking. There are some vectors which will always be relevant. So one is demand, another one is cost, economic benefit, and what are the relevant applications and services. So there's been already some discussion about potential spectrum bands from the IMT viewpoint. So I think that's the wrong way to start the conversation, because the international community, to begin with, has not aligned any thinking about spectrum bands for 6G. So if we go back to WRC 15, there's been no discussion about one example that's been provided before by my IMT colleague, the spectrum band between 7 gigahertz and 24 gigahertz. There's been no agreement on that. There's been no discussion. So WRC 15, there was no identification or no agenda item between 7 gigahertz and 24 gigahertz. So that's out of the question. Then WRC 19, same. There was no discussion, no agreement, no agenda item to discuss 7 to 24 gigahertz for 6G IMT. WRC 23 doesn't have it either. So I think we need to look at this 6G question from a point of view which comes from a realistic place. And since WRC 23 is not going to be deciding any spectrum band in the 7 gigahertz to 24 gigahertz range, then what are we left with? Then maybe we can think about the terahertz range. So let's hold that thought for a second while we go through these 4 points. So one valuable exercise is to look at trends and what's been happening on the high bands if we want to look for a proxy in terms of what 6G might look like. So here we have a snapshot of the regional trend in Asia Pacific for the 5G development. So the focus is mid-band, followed by low band, and not much is going on in the 28 gigahertz, for example, and limited deployment in 26. So an indication of how the spectrum landscape might look like in 2030. It might be useful to see what the trend is looking now and the reasons for that. So that trend is looking like that for this reason as well. It's the TOC, the total cost of ownership. It doesn't look very favorable on the terrestrial sense when we go up in frequencies in the millimeter wave spectrum, let alone moving upwards to that in terahertz spectrum. So if 5G base stations can provide a coverage area of 100 meters and cannot penetrate through glass, walls, vegetation. So what are we talking about here when we're talking about 6G and the potential for 6G IMT above 30 gigahertz? And also we need to look at where the demand is, but also where the economic benefits are going to come from. So it will be in any event of a development of a 6G platform, although it's way too early to think about it really from a business sense, for us in the technology development sector, satellite companies, and also in the terrestrial sense, we know that there is still a long way to go for 5G to be rolled out. So the expectation, according to the GSMA, is that 5G will be about 25% of the total share of mobile connections by 2030, 25%. So a quarter of the world will be covered with 5G by 2030. So when we think about that, is there any chance to have a realistic shot at 6G by 2030 if only 25% of the world is covered with 5G by 2030? So the economic benefit will definitely be limited when there is no harmonized approach when it comes to the spectrum, for example, for 6G, and where there is no discussion planned to identify 6G bands in the next WRC, and unlikely maybe for the next one either. But these are the drivers in terms of the discussion. So I would like to offer to the audience that when thinking about 6G, we need to look for vectors of what's going on now. And now the fourth point, relevant applications and services. So here we can dream a little bit. Here we can put our thinking hat in terms of what are the possibilities. So, like it was rightly pointed by my colleague from Ofcom, we need to think about ubiquity. Otherwise, how are we going to have a global and powerful platform for infrastructure, in infrastructure terms, for AI? So will AI be an application for the developed world only, or do we want AI to be an application for everybody in every region? And really, when it comes to ubiquitous AI, the only way that we can achieve that is by powering up the coverage. So how are we going to cover all the different regions of the world with terahertz spectrum? You can only do it from space. Just like in Ka band, you do it with millimeter wave, you can only do it from space. So it was rightly pointed by Ofcom that if in the event that 6G becomes a global priority for planning, there will be a need for a convergence, a fusion between space-based infrastructure and terrestrial-based infrastructure. There's no question about that. It's way too hard to achieve coverage with bands in that part of the spectrum. You can only do it from space with those bands. So when we think about terahertz, sub-terahertz range, automatically that will point us to space-based solutions. And a lot of it is going on already. As you can see in the space industry, that's the most exciting ICT industry right now. There is a race to develop the best right now. So where is the excitement happening? Where is the innovation happening? Where are all these new players coming in? It's all space-based. So 6G will be space-based. Not only for coverage, but also because of the current differentials that exist in all countries between served populations with broadband, unserved, and underserved. We need to bridge those gaps if we want global AI. We need to think about 6G equals global AI. That's it. And that will definitely point us to the kind of infrastructure. If we think about ubiquity and AI, we're talking about infrastructure that can deliver terabit per second type of broadband. And again, that's where high throughput satellites come. And this is where companies like Viasat are placing their bet for the future. It's the terabit per second type of performance delivered from space directly, anywhere, anytime. So I think that it is a little bit too early to discuss IMT 6G, where this is not being discussed at WRC when it comes to spectrum, but we can think about the economics, the cost, the applications that can come from space-based terabit per second type of technology. So that's where I believe things will move in a world that wants global AI fully ubiquitous by 2030. So with that, I'd like to close my brief presentation, and I think I'm right on time. Thank you, Dan.
Thank you very much, Christian. And you really brought some realism into the whole 6G debate, talking about the cost implications and need to bridge the gaps, digital connectivity gaps, and I think those are really good. So I think now we are moving into the Q&A session. Let me ask if there are any questions on the floor here in Bangkok. If there's anybody who would like to ask a question from the floor, just raise your hand and somebody will be there with mic to you. Okay, so no questions in the room. Let's go ahead and have some questions from the online audience then. In the meantime, if anybody has a question, just raise your hands and somebody will be with you. I think one of the questions that a lot of people are asking, and some asking here also, what are the right fora to talk about 6G discussions? And we have discussions going on in the ITU. I know people talk about WRC 23 and WRC 27. ITU Working Party 5D has been working on defining some standards for IMT 2030. There is ITU-T, which is also working on super networks. And 3GPP is, of course, continuing to develop various new releases. But are these the right fora? Are there other fora, other appropriate bodies who can define 6G, or it is this? So, anyone on the panel, if you'd like to talk about what are the right places to discuss the standardization or defining of the 6G. Maybe I can start with Christina, and maybe she can talk a bit about that.
Thanks, Bibi. It is an interesting question, as some of the comments are. 3GPP is very focused on mobile as mobile network operators delivering something. So what we're seeing, and I hope it came through my presentation as well, is that we see this a convergence of different potential technology solutions to deliver that vision. And as Christian just said, there are different components, terrestrial, non-terrestrial, etc. I don't have the answer to say where should it be happening. But one of the things that I hope, given we are totally at the beginning of this journey on 6G, is that we would find a forum in which actually all of the different technology can be considered together from start, because if not, we're going to find potentially ourselves in the same situation of 5G, where we started with a good intention, but then potentially haven't achieved as much as we wanted to achieve from the start.
Yeah, thank you. And anybody else on the panel? Christian? Anything from your perspective, knowing that the satellite is handled in Working Party 4A and 4C, and then we have other groups in ITU-T and ITU-D. So what's your thought on that? Christian, over to you.
Oh, yeah, okay. I got audio now. Thank you. Okay, so to think about 6G, I think we need to stop thinking about the one singular technology, for sure. So equating 6G to IMT will be the wrong place to begin the discussion. So perhaps instead of saying 6G equals mobile, 6G, the G is global to me. So 6G is global AI. So we don't need more variants of the same that we have now, right? 2G, 3G is all mobile terrestrial. 6G is 6 global, basically. And for that, you need a fusion of terrestrial and space-based infrastructure. And the driver behind that is AI, obviously. But also we need to think about implications of cost and the cost of delivering big data. So AI means we're going to rely on generation, production, and use of big data. And as we all know, and this is a common theme for space-based providers, satellite providers, as well as terrestrial providers, is that the cost of data is not going up, it's going down. So data is becoming cheaper and cheaper and cheaper. So we need to think about what's the best way to keep up with that trend of data becoming super cheap in order for industry to be able to invest and develop infrastructure that can provide this global AI world of 6G. So that's a challenge for industry, and it's particularly challenging for those industry players that engage in very high capital investment. And the higher you move in frequency, things become more expensive to deploy in the terrestrial sense. That's why there needs to be this fusion between space-based, where those high frequency bands are the usual for us. You know, we use Ka and above. Space communication is all about the high band. So we already used to the economics of it. So I believe that the wider industry will need to think about what adjustments are required to accommodate for the cost of the infrastructure, thinking about how cheap data has become and is likely to become even cheaper. So where will the revenue streams come from? So we need to think about those relevant applications and services, you know, to avoid breaking even or to make a mistake. You know, we need to be able to have a sustainable path ahead. So that's some of the thoughts I'd like to offer on that.
Thank you. And while I have you on the stage, there was a question regarding how real this whole satellite is. I mean, people have said the satellite has been there for a long time and with so many promises, but the costs are still high and the data rates are still limited. And I know there are lots of competition coming up, lot of technology development coming up in satellite, from OneWeb to Viasat to so many LEOs constellation coming up. But people still ask, how realistic is that, and how do we really think that we'll have the terabits speeds from satellite, particularly the LEO satellites, at 200 kilometer with 50 millisecond kind of latency? Uh, is it real? Again, back to you, Gomez.
So back to me again?
Yeah.
All right. So are you referring to question 4 that came up in the...
Yes, exactly.
Okay, so that question says something interesting. So, you know, how 1 terabit per second can be achieved from space by 2030, and what about the cost devices and US $400 to $600? I think that question is not for me, really. That question is for SpaceX.
Okay. All right. Thank you very much. Mr. Dr. Liu, you wanted to add something on that whole discussion about the right for perhaps.
Yes. I think I go back to the first question, the first discussion. I think in past we do see for different sectors we have different organization to define the corresponding standards and try to make it the products. But from 4G, we can see, for example, for the cellular network, start to converge with the broadcasting network. For example, in China, I think we even for 5G now, the broadcasting and the operators work together with China Mobile. We deploy a 5G network based on 700 megahertz bandwidth spectrum, and we share the network. Then we help to them to achieve very low cost network deployment and provide very good coverage for the broadcasting services. And also now we are also considering the, even for 4G, for 5G in 3GPP already start to consider how the harmonization or convergence of the satellite and the terrestrial network can be converged together, especially the harmonized standard or unified standard or even some coordination. Then it will really help to to improve the user's experience in different aspects. For example, to guarantee the seamless coverage. When the cellular is not available, you can use satellite. When satellite is not available, you can use the cellular. I think it's really have some good progress on this aspect. Even from us, we are also considering how to try such kind of solutions based on our 5G network. So from that, I think it's also a very important direction for future. For different sectors, we can come together to define the common, unified standards to support both. Then we can share the ecosystem, share the market volume, then which will be very helpful to reduce the cost, the price of especially the network and also the devices itself. Then I think it should be beneficial for both sector. So from this perspective, I do believe by now, I think 3GPP has start to involve more players from more sectors to work together, try to figure out the common solutions and try to achieve the harmonized way for the new service application. I do believe even for future, 3GPP will continue to do that. Because we from the terrestrial network perspective, we do believe it's the right way. It's the right direction for us to go ahead. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Let me come to you, Stuart. And there are some questions about is it the right time to start talking about the spectrum for 6G? Are we thinking in the right way that first we define the vision in terms of define the technologies and then we talk about the spectrum? Are we right in talking at WRC 23 about a possible spectrum agenda for WRC 27 for identifying some new spectrum? So, Stuart, over to you.
Thank you, BB. My first slides talked about 1G in the 1980s through to 5G in 2019 or around there. Mm-hmm. It takes a long time to standardize a mobile broadband technology, particularly one that's aimed global deployments. So, that is a non-trivial exercise, and that it's to do with the other question as well. To introduce a new generation requires a discussion with regulators, governments, operators, verticals, manufacturers, the internet industry, and as we look to 6G, there's the non-terrestrial network angle, Wi-Fi community, maybe, the whole virtual world. Who is the customer or customers out there? It's not just about human beings anymore, right? So it takes a long time. And what is the alternative? So, the ITU kind of works, doesn't it? It does bring together regulators, industry, mobile research community, supported by the detailed standards organizations. So that takes an enormous effort and time. And we have world radio conferences, and there are differences of opinions on those. But what's the alternative? We have a very successful mechanism to begin that 10-year cycle of debating the vision, the research community, thinking about spectrum needs and then perhaps identifying some spectrum bands. So that takes a long time, and it works. The terrestrial community have technically and commercially successfully delivered generation after generation after generation. And so with 6G, you know, lots of questions have been raised about other sectors, and we definitely need to address and engage with the other sectors, but it seems to work. And so we're proposing that we start that debate, because in our experience, that takes a long time. Let's have a debate at the WRC 23 as to whether we want an agenda item for 27. And if we do, what does that agenda item contain? So I do think, and the industry does think, that this is the right time to begin the conversation. I know there's a reaction that people think it's too early, but based on our previous experience, now is probably the right time. Thank you, Dee.
Thank you, Stuart. And maybe I can go to Christina also for this whole timing issue. I think this is clearly a big debate around the world as to what is the right time to start talking about spectrum for 6G. So,
Yes.
what are your thoughts on that?
Thanks, Bibi. And I wanted to bring sort of the regulator point of view. Why are we starting, I would say, to be interested in this as well? I totally agree on the principle. You need to understand the applications first, the use cases. What is it that you are trying to achieve? But as this is developing, and obviously different parties are starting to test the potential applications, etc. They are using spectrum, and for us, it's very important, as Stuart said, because it takes a long time. It's very important to understand where the attention is going from actually different technologies. I want to bring back the point of terrestrial, non-terrestrial, Wi-Fi and mobile, etc. Where are the different technologies looking at that type of evolution? Because there may be conflict, there may be sort of use cases that need to grow from different type of technologies. So we need to understand what are the long-term implications, because we need to understand how we could manage at its best this resource, and that takes time. So from a regulator perspective, whilst I totally agree with the question saying, aren't you putting the carriage in front of the horses? Fair enough, but we need to understand the implication of the direction of travel. And this is why, from a regulator perspective, it's quite important to monitor, understand, and assess the impact that any new technologies may have on the existing users. Because let's be honest, even at terahertz, you already have some existing user that needs to continue to deliver the services that they are delivering. So for us, is a game of understanding and preparing for a future that will come.
Yeah, thank you very much. And I think the entire subject has been very well covered in all the presentations. Yes, Christian, you wanted to add something. Go ahead.
Thank you. I just wanted to add to what Christina said, and also Stuart. I think here we have a point of convergence, and we all feel very strong about the need for international norms and to develop norms and a regulatory environment that is conducive to a global harmonized landscape. So by 2030, we will still need a global harmonized landscape. So we do need to operate towards that goal of having this global ICT landscape for global AI, where there are international norms that we have developed jointly as a community. So here, I totally 100% agree and support what Stuart said, that the role of ITU will still be extremely important. So that's the platform where we come together, terrestrial and non-terrestrial, to discuss what's the best way to achieve, a global approach to infrastructure. And regulators like Ofcom as well, they play a key role in those forums. So regardless of the different ideas from different industry sectors, I think global norm making will still be a key. And it is unfortunate, perhaps, that maybe one or two stakeholders in the industry might not want to be part of that norm building, collaboration across countries and industry. There is one particular risk on this, is that any development of technology which is not aimed to be sustainable in the future, particularly in space, where things can go wrong in a major way and things can develop into even an environmental crisis. If there is no dialogue between industry, government, and the ITU, then we're in the wrong path. So I think I'm fully aligned here with the panel here that norm-making and harmonized decisions through the ITU will lead to the best outcome, for sure.
Okay, thank you very much. I think we have run out of time, but it has been a wonderful panel. We have had detailed discussions. I only wish we had 60 here and we could have been holographically present on the stage there, but maybe next time. And thank you very much, all the panelists. You have been wonderful. And with that, I will hand over back to Dan and Party to continue with this conference. Thank you very much.
Bibi, thank you very much, and thank you to all of our panelists, to Christian here, and to all of our panelists joining virtually as well. And start of a discussion that I'm sure is going to be happening more and more over the next few years. So looking forward to seeing how things develop as we move beyond 5G in that way. So now on to the thank you very much, Christian. Thank you. So now on to the final session for today. So the session we're calling Spectrum Shorts. So there are a few themes that we thought we wanted to cover in some way, and we thought we'd bring them all together into this last session to cover some of the key issues, as we're going to be looking at, first of all, fixed wireless access, and then we're going to be looking at backhaul and meeting the backhaul needs of current and future connectivity demands. So to introduce our speakers for this session, delighted to have our moderator who's going to be joining us virtually. So that's Hans Ile from NERA. So I think I can hopefully welcome Hans. There we are. Hi, Hans. How are you doing?
Hi, Dan.
Good to see you. Good to see you. So looking forward to this last session. So without further ado, I will pass over to you.
All right. Well, thank you, Dan. It's a pleasure to be here again today. Welcome everyone to this final session of the conference. My name is Hans Ile. I'm an associate director with NERA Economic Consulting, and I predominantly work on spectrum auction, spectrum valuation, and spectrum pricing. Now, as Dan's already mentioned, this final session is going to be split into two parts. In the first session, we're going to focus on fixed wireless access, and in the second session on backhaul. In terms of the first session, FWA, we all know that FWA has long been touted as a key use case for 5G. And I still remember when Verizon and AT&T rolled out their initial millimeter wave deployments, there was this big hype and huge focus on home broadband services. And then since then, we've seen a number of spectrum auctions that wireless internet service providers have actually competed for 5G spectrum against the more traditional mobile operators. So where are we now with FWA? I have Ahmed Al-Shal here with me to discuss this. Ahmed is acting head of technology planning at DO in the UAE. So Ahmed, without further ado, over to you.
Hi, thank you for the introduction. Yes. The slides coming now. In this presentation and this small and short discussion, we will touch base on our deployment and how we have deployed our FWA as the first use case for our 5G network. We will cover some overview from industry perspective, and then we will jump to the most important topic, which is the spectrum and what's our understanding to the industry and customer needs, and how we managed the design of our network, which is has the MBB normal mobile users plus the FWA users. Next, please. Yes, from this slide, it's overview from the industry, how the 5G industry is progressing in terms of number of 5G network. In 2020, we end up with 124 5G networks. By end of last year, we end up with almost 200 5G networks globally, worldwide, and also in terms of 5G users, almost the numbers not double, it's tripled from 230 millions to almost more than 700 million users, 5G users. Also from 5G smartphone availability in 2020, we end up with 162 smartphones, and by end of last year, we end up with almost 614 5G smartphones. This overview about the industry and how the numbers significantly increase in terms of 5G networks, in terms of 5G users, and the ecosystem readiness from device and smartphone perspective. If we focus more about the FWA network, out of the 124 5G networks, 44 operators has decided to start with FWA as the first 5G use case. It's a low-hanging fruit use case. You have the capacity and network, and you have the ecosystem readiness of term of device. All operators decided, the 44 operators in 2020, they decided to start with FWA as the first 5G use cases, and this number increased by almost 84% by 2021, and we end up with almost 81 operators worldwide. They have deployed the 5G FWA use case with more than 3 million customers. Also, if we check the device cost from smartphone perspective and also from 5G CPE perspective, the number of device increasing in yearly basis, and on the other hand, the cost of device is increasing over the years. In 2020, almost the 5G CPE cost is exceeding the $400, and end of last year, there's some models available in the market. It's cost around $200, and the cost will be decreased over the coming years also. Next, please. Yes, this is the most important topic, how we are utilizing our resource. We are from network side, from radio perspective. The spectrum is our main fuel and our main pillar to deliver such use case. From our side, we have started deploying the 5G network using the C-band, and we have almost 200 megahertz bandwidth in C-band, and we started deployment because it's fulfilled the IMT requirements in terms of high throughput, and also in terms of coverage perspective, because the IMT requirements, yes, there's coverage requirement, there's latency requirements, and there's also capacity requirement. But we have started with the C-band as main spectrum. following with the N41, 2.6 gigahertz, and we have almost 100 also megahertz in this band. But we use it mainly for the coverage requirements. And in the coming, in the near future, we will utilize some of the existing LTE band, FDD band, to support our deployment for 5G to serve the indoor user, because the low band, the sub 3 gig band, it's serving, it's penetrating more inside the buildings, and it will serve the indoor users. Next. Yes, this one of the challenge we used to have, and we already tackle it in certain way, because by the end we have one network. It caters the normal MBB user, and on the top of it, it caters the FWA user. And we know the requirements and the nature of FWA customers. They are using and utilizing the network heavily in terms of gigabits requirements. Having two type of customers in one network, somehow very challenging. However, you need to bring tools and techniques to tackle this situation. From our side, yes, we have deployed the FWA over the 5G. For sure, we need to have first priority and top priority to the MBB users. With we consider them as high ARPU customer, but that's why we need to focus on their experience more than FWA users experience. But giving from our side, we have deployed many initiatives to give this a priority to customer in terms of defining a QCI for them, even from radio resources for SPID implementation. We are giving a high priority to the MBB users, plus some features where our partner they have supported us to deploy the main features, which give more priority to the MBB users. On the top of features and prioritizing the MBB users, you need to have tool also which give you more insight about the customer, about their ratio camping over the 5G compared to 4G, also the throughput they are getting. Even it's give more insight to commercial guy to see also the churn ratio for certain product, and the reason for it. Is it related to the capacity and the throughput? Is it related to the coverage? Is it related to other? The tool itself, it gives you more insight about the customer and how we are tackling the customers. Next, please. How many minutes left? Just to control the time. Okay, excellent. I have almost, yes, 2 slides. We will cover it in the coming 5 minutes. Yes, as a normal product, the product start with acquisition, then in a nurture phase, then loyalty. If the customer like the product and he is getting more attached to the product and the service provider also. From acquisition perspective, yes, you need to select the right approach. You need to select the right resources that you have, and select also the tool. It gives you more insight. In terms of right approach, yes, as I mentioned in the previous slide, since we have decided to deploy the FWA on the existing network, over the existing network, you need to give more priority to the MBB user. Also, give also good expectation to the FWA users in terms of upload and download throughput. And even the upload and download, it's evolving over the time. Yes, we started with C-band deployment, and we are adding the N41, the 2.6, and in the near future, yes, we have also options once the ecosystem will be more mature also to support the carrier aggregation, the TDD carrier aggregation. Yes, we will add it as additional layer to our network in order to support the gigabits per second experience. In the nurture phase, we need to maintain our customer by improving their experience, also having excellent tool and setup to monitor the device itself and monitor the experience, okay, from network side. Getting information from device is not sufficient. You need to correlate it with what you have in network in terms of capacity and in terms of throughput and coverage that been provided to the customer. For such requirements, you need to have a powerful tool which support the AI, the algorithms to give you the indicators, give you alarms, give you also a recommendation for improvement in terms of expanding recommendation, or also expansion recommendation. Next, please. Yes, this last slide of my presentation, how we can see the evolution of a spectrum during last year and this year, and also in the coming 3 years and after that also. Starting from last year, as I mentioned, yes, we started with the C-band 3.6 to 3.8. We have deployed almost 100. We have utilized 100 megahertz from our available resources on C-band as main layer for the 5G and 5G deployment. In addition to that, we have added the N41 as a coverage layer, because 2.6 is give you more penetration, and it give more presentation also. Yes, there's one message I need to end it in 1 minute. No worries. Also utilizing the FDD, because we need to get also to refarm some of our FDD spectrum to be used in 5G, because it's required for the 5G and 5G SA deployment for indoor penetration. That's why we have our own strategy and plan to refarm some of the existing LTE or 3G spectrum to serve also the 5G. Also, after that, once we have the deployment, also we have also features that we can use it, like DSS, dynamic spectrum sharing, for transition period to cater the 4G users and 5G users. And after that, most of the spectrum beyond the 25 will be go toward the 5G. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, Ahmed, for this very insightful presentation. I have so many questions, but I'd like to give the audience a chance first. So if we do have any questions from the audience, could they please be posted to the chat? Okay, in which case I'll just ask my question. And that is, it's very interesting to see that you're attracting customers to this FWA solution that you're offering. What kind of customers are you targeting, or what kind of customers do you see taking up this type of FWA service?
From our side, we have started with consumer segment first, with the consumer, because with the consumer you have big base, and the big base of customers, they need high capacity. That's why we have selected the consumer as the first user to be in FWA product. And the remaining customers, type of customers, the enterprise, large enterprise, it will follow for sure.
All right, great. Thank you very much. Have we got any? Doesn't look like we've got any further questions. I think we can. I may ask. Oh, so I've been told to move on. But thank you very much again, Ahmed. I think that was really interesting. It's good to see that that you're deploying FWA, and it's good to see that there's uptake for this type of service, and such rapid uptake as well. Thank you very much. We'll move on to the second part of the session now, which is on backhaul, and here we'll focus on, in particular, wireless backhaul solutions. And as we all know, mobile data consumption keeps increasing, which puts ever-growing demands on backhaul services in general. And the key question that we're trying to address in the second part here is, in terms of wireless backhaul, what needs to be done to ensure that this type of backhaul does not become a bottleneck. I have two great experts here with me to discuss this. The first one is Renato Lombardi, who is chairman of the ETSI Industry Study Group on millimeter wave transmission, and he's also head of the Huawei Italy Research Center. So Renato, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Hans. Good afternoon to everyone in Bangkok. Good morning, good afternoon to the people connected online. Let's see if slides come up. Okay, as said in the introduction, next slide, please. I'm chairing the Industry Specification Group of ETSI, working on micromillimeter wave backhaul, especially for 4 and 5G networks. Next slide, please. So this slide is to emphasize the importance of wireless backhaul. We have more than 70% of the macro base stations worldwide that are connected with wireless backhaul, either what we call microwave traditional bands in the first box from 6 to 42 gigahertz, of course, with very much regional differences in terms of frequency usage, and E-band, so 71, 86 gigahertz, that it is growing importance and is the fastest growing segment in the wireless backhaul. This has been also certified by GSMA backhaul task force that was established 2 years ago and came out with a very important report that I invite everyone to have a look. That also foresees by 2027 still more than 55% of the macro base stations connected with wireless backhaul. Next slide. So what we see in terms of main trends, first, of course, is the capacity increase that makes indispensable to have a different paradigm shift also for the wireless backhaul in terms of spectrum usage and features that are going to be deployed. What we see is change in the topology of the network, so moving from chains to what we call star topology, so hub and spikes. And this leads to what we call shorter networks, so only one hop from the fiber point of presence to the tail site. This is also quite useful in order to avoid too much capacity on aggregated links, but also to shorten, to keep low latency, because we have only one hop from the POP to the tail site. Then what we see also for the densification of the sites and more penetration of fiber in the network, we have also what shorter hops. So here in the graph, you can see worldwide average done with statistics of networks in terms of the link length distribution. And we have seen that in Asia Pacific countries, the high percentage of links, of short links, is even higher. mainly due to a lower penetration of fiber in urban and suburban areas. So this leads, even with rain region P, so the highest rain intensity, to more than 20% of links shorter than 1 kilometer, so very well covered with E-band, and up to 65% in Asia Pacific with links shorter than 4 kilometers. And these could be covered with what we call band aggregation, so dual band, E-band plus either 15, 18, or 23 gigahertz, so giving really the boost of capacity necessary for the 5G deployment. Next slide. Of course, what we still have to do is to work as industry in order to make proper licensing and especially also proper spectrum fees. Here I put just an example of comparison. 3 Asia-Pacific countries, Germany, Spain, the UK, you can see the difference, especially when we go to the E-band. So the license fees in this case are not really taking into account the advantages of going to the higher portion of the spectrum in terms of usability of the channel. In the sense of a much wider spectrum available, so the possibility to have much wider channel accommodating larger capacities, but without having the license fees linearly scale up with the channel width. The formula that you see in the box is what we propose at ETSI to take into account all the advantages of using the high portion of the frequency. And then you can see countries like Germany, the UK, but I would say on average in Europe are really incentivizing operators to go to the E-band. And that's why also say the advantages in terms of TCO for the license fees and the possibility to transmit the capacities in excess of 5 or 10 gigabits is driving the deployment of more and more E-band links in the network. Next slide. So in terms of wireless backhaul, what we can see is for traditional bands from 6 to 42 gigahertz, we need wider channels. But once again, without making the spectrum fees linearly grow with the channel bandwidth. So from 28, we necessarily have to go to 56, 112, and where possible, 224 megahertz. We need to introduce the concept of geographical spectrum efficiency. So, for instance, no additional fees for the use of the second polarization. At the end, the only one that can reuse the polarization on a link is the same operator that is using the cross-polar interference canceller. So dual polarization must be seen as geographical spectrum efficiency and incentivized by the administration without requiring additional fees. The same is also for incentivizing the deployment of features that can be used to mitigate or even cancel interference, and move in order to implement those features from individual licensing to block or hybrid licensing. That is a block licensing in which you don't pay upfront for the block, but upon activation of the link. As regards E-band, it's necessary to allow very wide channels up to 1 gigahertz to reduce the licenses in order to incentivize the use of millimeter wave bands and also offload the congestion in traditional bands and also favor the deployment of the band aggregation, because in this case we can have links up to 4 kilometers transmitting peak rates up to 5 or 10 gigabits. Next slide. So in conclusions is still to stress and to confirm the importance of macro millimeter wave backhaul for the future mobile networks. That current microwave and millimeter wave are already capable of meeting 5G requirements. The role that can be played by E-band in the backhaul of 5G deployment, and especially in Asia Pacific. So we need also to demystify the fact that E-band cannot be installed due to rain. So we are wide range of examples of the use of E-band in all those conditions. But what we need is that the licensing schemes, and especially the spectrum fees, should be suitable in order to permit operators to find reasonable advantageous TCOs in order to deploy micro millimeter wave and especially E-band for this. So we really need to have common industry actions with administrations to promote innovations also on how spectrum is regulated and licensed. Last slide, thank you. Okay, so I invite you to visit our website, in which we have a lot of publications, a lot of very interesting discussions on the use of micro millimeter wave backhaul. That's it. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Renato. It's very interesting. I've got some questions, but we'll park them and we'll introduce our second speaker first. So that is Koo Keng Wei, who is Head of Network Strategy and Technology at Celcom Axiata in Malaysia. So over to you, Koo.
Yeah. Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you to the organizer for allowing me the opportunity to share the stage with the distinguished panelists and also presenter that has shared with us their wealth of experience over the last 2 days. So is there a slide that will be, yeah. Okay, so I'm going to be talking about delivering backhaul services with respect to microwave in meeting current and future connectivity demands. So for the mobile industry, there's quite a very strong growth of momentum, both in terms of mobile data traffic that's going to be increasing either 2 times from the 4G LTE perspective, or depending on which year that you want to start from, could be easily somewhere between 10 to 20 times in terms of growth from now until 2027. So this is also driven by the adoption of 5G and also mobile subscription. That's going to be moving from 8.1 billion today up to 8.9 billion forecasted by Ericsson in the year 2027. What they have predicted is also almost 50% of those subscription is going to be running over 5G. And as the technology allows it, 5G will allow a lot more data to be carried over the wireless network. So what we are seeing is that there is a technology evolution from the 4G and 5G RAN perspective that is increasing the wireless capacity so that you can serve multitude of use cases ranging from AR, VR, metaverses, high definition content, live streaming, down to fixed wireless services as the earlier presenter from DU was sharing with us, down right to smart city and manufacturing. So you can see that there's a lot of activity with regards to the radio portion in terms of having more larger spectrum bandwidth implemented with regards to LTE carrier aggregation. So we're seeing that move from one carrier component or up to 4 carrier component or 4 CC. And then with 5G, we're seeing spectrum bandwidth of a single carrier in 100 megahertz, allowing speeds of in excess of 1 gigabits per second. So now there's a lot of development on the RAN that needs to be matched on the backhaul side of it. So I think we've spoke a lot about connectivity. I think the unsung hero is also in terms of the mobile backhaul as well. And here around in Asia, especially in Malaysia, we see that there's quite a lot of microwave still being in use as well, and which we can also reuse and to scale alongside this RAN evolution to meet that data experience. So all this yesterday, today, tomorrow is basically more of a relative term. So from technology perspective, we are increasing the MIMO schemes higher and higher, starting from 1T1R, and then now for LTE, it's always come default with 2T2R. And when 5G comes, and also with regards to LTE, we're seeing quite a lot of developments in the area of massive MIMO being deployed as well. So hence, from the microwave or from the backhaul perspective, we need that technology innovation to also increase that backhaul capacity, moving from sites requirement of 500 megabits per second upwards to excess of 5 gigabits per second when we want to truly unlock the value, the true experience of 5G. So there's a few ways in terms of how microwave can deliver this. I think we'll start at the bottom, where you can always upgrade the channel bandwidth, moving that from 28, 56 up to 112 megahertz for different bands, moving from 13, 15, 18, or even 23 as well. But is that really the right way to do it? Depends on what is available for that specific market. But scaling it up will cause a bit of an issue, because then you start running out of spectrum and it gets a bit congested from the spectrum perspective. And I think that's where we've seen solution in the market from the microwave vendors in terms of improving spectrum efficiency using dual or second polarization, as Renato mentioned earlier on. So we'll also need, in terms of the policy from a regulatory perspective, to incentivize the adoption of spectrum efficiency when running on microwave. For example, in certain countries and markets, even though they are using the same channel or the same frequency, doing a second polarization incurs a doubling of the fees. So that's not really incentivizing the spectrum efficiency, and probably that's something that can be addressed. Next is increasing the capability, the capacity, and also the link reliability, because we're talking about moving and delivering high capacity over a larger distance. So we need to also unlock new spectrum bands, such as E-bands, and then using band aggregation to deliver that high throughput for the base station. So when we use the traditional 18 or 23 gigahertz, that gives us somewhere around 150 to 300 megabits per second. But what do you do when you need to deliver 5G services in a suburban area, in an urban area, where options such as fiber isn't available, and you want to bridge the digital divide, and you want to send 5G and provide good 5G throughput experiences in the rural area. So those are areas and opportunities where microwave can come in and bridge that divide, offering solutions like E-band and band aggregation to deliver the high capacity, so that there isn't any disparity between the experiences for users who are in the urban, the suburban, and also the rural area. Yeah. So I think in summary, I just want to close it up that there is quite a lot of innovation and technology that can be adopted, can be taken advantage to deliver the high capacity for mobile backhaul to meet the true 5G experience. But from the regulation and licensing framework, it also has a role to play in promoting the adoption of these technologies. So with that, I end my presentation. Thank you.
Great, thank you so much. Cool. We've got questions from the audience already, and there's one that I wanted to ask up front, and that is, I mean, you both mentioned license fees as a big sticking point and a big issue, that they don't scale appropriately, and so on. Another key point, obviously, is also the licensing regime, and I think Renato sort of touched on that in his slide, where he mentioned a hybrid model. And I think it would be helpful to just give a brief overview of the different options and what your views are on those different licensing regimes, ranging from the traditional link by link to light licensing regimes.
Okay, maybe I can just elaborate quickly. So most of the countries' administrations, they use individual licensing. So it means operators should apply on a link-by-link basis. What we propose is exclusive allocation of a block to an operator. So it is possible to deploy features for interference mitigation and cancellation, and that's possible only with interoperators, so the same operator deploying these cancellation features. But hybrid means that instead of paying upfront for like an auction for the block, maybe to pay just a little upfront or nothing, and then to pay upon activation of the link. So if we want to incentivize the use of interference cancellation, interference mitigation, and therefore going to the frequency reuse, so that means much higher spectrum efficiency from geographical perspectives, administration should allocate blocks, but should be done in a way that fees do not scale up too much. Today, the percentage in the TCO for the backhaul of the spectrum fee is on average more than 50%. So while hardware technologies make products more and more competitive from a cost point of view, and features may make easier and less expensive deployment, installation, commissioning, and maintenance, the percentage for the spectrum fees is growing because it grows linearly with the capacity. So that's something we have to break.
All right, thanks. Anything to add, Ku? Shall we move to the next question?
I have nothing to add. Renato put it very, very well.
Okay, good. All right, then the second question. Okay. A question from the audience. How's the progress of E-band adoption for 5G backhaul globally?
I can, sorry, Ku, then I leave it to you. The ETSI ISG was established in January 2015 as an initiative of some vendors and operators to promote the use of E-band worldwide. Then we enlarged our scope of work to cover all wireless backhaul applications. So what we wanted to show already 8 years ago was that the E-band technology was mature, and the propagation characteristics at 80 gigahertz was very well known, and the performance and availability of the links very highly predictable. So with the increase of capacity necessary to backhaul the later stages of 4G and the initial deployments of 5G makes capacity grow so much that E-band, so the 80 gigahertz, and the dual band, so the band aggregation, as the really good solution. What we see is that E-band is growing, is the fastest growing segment in terms of frequency subdivision. Europe decided, so most of the administration, to lower the cost of the spectrum fees, so to something in the order of 50 to 100 euro per year on 250 megahertz channels. So this is the direction. And we have seen also the success of 5G deployment in the Middle East, so in Saudi, in the Emirates, thanks to a very high penetration of E-band for the deployment with the best. So also for Asia Pacific, notwithstanding rain intensity may be a limiting factor in the hop lengths, the performance and availability is very well predictable. And as I've shown, up to more than 65% of the links that could be covered either with E-band or what we call band aggregation.
Okay, great, thank you. Then the next question is almost certainly then now for Ku, and that is pricing of, in particular, E-band spectrum in Asia Pacific and potentially in Malaysia. In particular, how does that differ from what Renato has just mentioned in terms of the trends that we're seeing in Europe with lower fees? And
I can speak on behalf of Europe or comparing that with Europe, but at least from the Malaysian context, we've seen that pricing per megahertz is somewhat lower for E-band as compared to the traditional 18 megahertz, for example. So there's quite a big opportunity in terms of deployment of E-band, at least for Malaysia, even though we are in the P region as well. So hence, I spoke about the need to combine that with band aggregation. So E-band with the traditional 15, 18, or 23 to increase the range, to increase the reliability of the link, but also to be able to deliver the necessary backhaul requirements for high capacity RAN like 4G Pro and 5G.
Okay, very good. We've got another question here. I think that's one for Renato, and that is, what does ETSI see as the role of wireless front haul for Open RAN?
So here, what we are doing is to go even higher than the E-band. So we worked already a few years ago on W-band and D-band, in which we can have even wider channels than what we can have at E-band. Of course, the distance gets shorter, but we are still able to cover all plans at D-band. D-band is 150 gigahertz, just to make it known, and the possibility to transmit up to 25 gigabits on a single carrier with the channels in the order of 4 or 5 gigahertz. So we are really using as much as we can the very wide spectrum that can be available when we go above 90 gigahertz. By using techniques that are quite consolidated, like cross-polar interference cancel, so the use of dual polarization, or a relatively simple line of sight MIMO, go up to 50 or 100 gigahertz. This is also partly doable at E-band. I say partly because if we have to share the 5 gigahertz paired spectrums to 3-4 operators, of course, it's not easy to find 2 gigahertz or 4 gigahertz channels, while these can be done at frequencies above 90 gigahertz. So working on the next bands that will come probably from 2025.
Great. And one final question for Ku, and that is, what's Cellcom's strategy for E-band for future backhaul network?
Well, so I think we really need to look into the RAN requirement in terms of scaling the microwave capacity in tandem with the backhaul as well. For us, fiber is also a very important strategy in terms of delivering better latency. But we also see that in terms of microwave, there is a place, an opportunity to connect it to areas which will require high capacity, where fiber is uneconomical. And those are areas where we see high opportunities where E-band, together with the right, with the right incentives, those are areas where we feel that E-band can play a part.
Great, thank you. We are sort of out of time now, but thank you very much for these insights, and I would then hand back to Dan.
So, Hans, thank you very much for that, and thank you as well, of course, to both our speakers in this panel, and also to the previous speaker from DO on the fixed wireless access as well. So thank you, guys. Really appreciate that, and some really interesting discussions once again. So thank you all.
Bye.
So that wraps up the sessions for this year's conference, and we're now delighted to start the formal closing for the conference. Now, for those of you who were with us yesterday morning, you'll know that we were joined by Mario Manovitz from ITU, and ITU, of course, are one of the key partners for the conference this year, and Mario was here to help us open the conference. And we're now delighted and honored to have another distinguished guest from ITU joining us to help us close the event. So it's my honor to introduce and welcome to the stage Atsuko Okuda, who's the Regional Director for Asia and the Pacific for the ITU. Atsuko-san, we really appreciate the support that you and all of your team here in the region at ITU provide us for the event and the important role that you've played in ensuring its success. I'm delighted to welcome you to the stage now and invite you to come and make your closing keynote presentation. Atsuko-san, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Good afternoon to everyone. I would like to start my concluding remarks by congratulating Forum Global and all partners on another successful annual Asia and Pacific Conference on Spectrum Management. This year marks the 8th year of our collaboration in facilitating discussion on relevant issues in managing the key national resource of radio spectrum in our dynamic Asia and the Pacific region. I'm very happy to join this time in person and hope that this is the start of the new normal and return to more on-site activities and interactions. We had 10 very captivating discussion sessions today before the closing. The high level of participation made the sessions lively with interesting inquiries on agenda items of WRC 23, C-band related discussion for finding the right balance in key mid-band frequencies and growing interest of the region in 6 GHz band. We all know that wireless services enable technologies and services to improve access, affordability, and security, as well as to secure the required investment. And in this context, the discussion during this event would help the participants to get involved in preparatory meetings for WRC 23 in a more informed way, with an eye on digital connectivity beyond 5G. I have noted with keen interest the case studies on licensing and planning for future wireless services that take into account stakeholder partnerships to overcome the barriers and continue to connect the hardest to reach areas. So while the IMT 2020 ecosystem is developing fast in Asia and the Pacific, I would also like to highlight that this continuously evolving field of spectrum management and RF monitoring requires regular sharing of knowledge. On our part, we have developed studies and conducted gap analysis promoting last-mile connectivity through the toolkits, guidelines, and Smart Village, Smart Island pilots, among other technical support, to assist administrations in better understanding different approaches to ensure that robust processes are established for the assignment of scarce radio frequency spectrum. ITU conducted a study on spectrum assignment of IMT-identified bands in Asia and the Pacific. This study will be published shortly and is intended to become a resource for contemporary information and insights on spectrum assignment of IMT-identified bands in the region. In this context, I would like to invite the experts who participated in this forum to support our ITU work in the region to assist countries in such areas as developing national satellite programs, updating spectrum economics regimes, developing RF monitoring capacities, and sharing innovative licensing models to connect the underserviced and unconnected. I am pleased to inform you that ITU has developed a unique platform to explore digital partnership opportunities through the ongoing Partner to Connect or P2C initiative. P2C aims to mobilize financing, policy, advocacy, and program pledges from administrations, industry, academia, and all stakeholders for the upcoming World Telecommunication Development Conference to be organized in Kigali, Rwanda in June 2022. I invite all of you to join us to bring in your specialties and expertise to harness and catalyze the opportunities of innovative spectrum management. Once again, I congratulate Dan and his team from Forum Global in successful conference and look forward to our continued relationship and partnership in the future. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Atsuko-san. And I think, we too look forward to continuing the relationship in the future. And as you said, hopefully this is the start of a return to more in-person events, both for this conference and for a lot of the ITU activities in the region and elsewhere as well. So thank you so much for joining us. So that just about wraps things up for this year's conference and for the first post-pandemic Global Spectrum Series event that we've been able to return to an in-person format, or at least partially in-person format. So a huge thank you, I'd like to say, first of all, to those of you who've attended the event and who've joined us here in person in Bangkok. It's been so good to finally see so many of you again, to catch up with some old friends and to meet some new people as well. So really do appreciate all of you being here, and I hope it's also been a useful experience for you to have the chance to catch up and to network and see people in person once again. And to the 500 or so of you who weren't able to join us in person but have been following the event virtually and online, thank you as well so much for your participation and your involvement in the event. The chat throughout every session has been very active on the platform, and we really do appreciate all of your questions, all of your comments, and the contribution that you've made to help us give some truly interactive discussion throughout all of the sessions at the event. So really do appreciate your participation, and hope that we're able to as well see you in person very soon, and you're able to maybe attend this event next year or another one of the events in person very soon as well. A huge thank you, of course, to all of our speakers, our panelists, and our moderators across the 11 sessions that we've taken place over the 2 days. Again, some of you have joined us here in person, and others of you have joined us online. But I think I can say that all of you have made a huge contribution to the discussions that have taken place. We've had some really interesting, wide-ranging discussions. Of course, not everyone has agreed, but that's the beauty of events like this. So really do appreciate all of your involvement, and the discussions that we've had have been fantastic once again. Thank you as well to all of our sponsor and partner organizations. So APT, ITU, and all of our sponsor organizations really do appreciate the support of each and every one of you. Those in the room can see the logos for our sponsors on the screen behind me here. And without the support of our sponsors and our partners, the event wouldn't be possible. So really do appreciate everything that you do to make the event possible as well. Thank you to our AV team here. So I think hopefully you'll all agree that it's run pretty smoothly with the hybrid format and things here. So to Ski and to all of the team, thank you all very much. You've been very professional and all worked very hard to ensure the smooth running of the event. So thank you. Do appreciate that. And a final huge thank you to my colleagues in the Spectrum team here at Forum Global. So to Kate and Jordan over there, and to Lula and James, who are outside, I think. Thank you to all of them. As ever, they've done a fantastic job behind the scenes and here as well to make sure everything runs smoothly with this first hybrid event. So guys, thank you very much for everything you've done, for all your hard work. Really appreciate it as ever. And just before we end, I wanted to give a final quick plug to some of our next events that are going to be taking place as part of the Global Spectrum Series. So we're hoping for events in all of the regions now to be returning to an in-person format. So we really hope to see as many of you as possible there at these events that we have coming up. So the next event we have is the European Spectrum Management Conference, which is going to be running alongside a meeting of the RSPG, and that's happening in Brussels on the 8th and 9th of June. And then following that, we have our Middle East and North Africa Spectrum Management Conference, and that's going to be taking place in Tunis, in Tunisia, on the 30th of June and the 1st of July, and that's running alongside the ASMG plenary meeting. So there'll be information of that on our website. We'll also be sending an email out with details on those. So they will be in person, but there will also be the option to attend all of those events virtually as well. So yeah, please feel free to do that, and we hope to see as many of you as possible at those. Then coming up second half of the year, we have our Sub-Sahara event, the Americas event, and the Latin Americas conference as well. So plenty of discussions taking place around the key issues. So that's just about it. Once again, thank you all so much for your participation. For those of you here in Bangkok, I wish you safe travels home. And to everyone, I look forward to seeing you all, hopefully, again very soon. Thank you very much.